Let's go ahead and copy stamp our buildings.
To do that, let's go back up to our buildings node, and we're going to find our switches, switch houses, and switch commercial, and this is where we're going to stamp these values. Let's go to the select input and type stamp. Open and close brackets, and in between there we're going to do quotation marks, and now we're going to find the path to our copy node. Up twice, find our building clusters node, because that is where we're going to be creating them, and in there we should find a node called copy1. The variable we want to find is houses var, and if it can't find any value, we want it to default to 1. Now we do the same thing, we copy this thing into the commercials, so I'll select that switch, paste it in, and instead of houses var, we're going to change that to commercial var. Right, let's go back into building clusters, and as you can already see, we've already got different buildings right there. Now, if we switch this to the houses, we get the same idea, but now we've got the houses instead of the commercial buildings. For more variety, because what's going to happen is we're going to be attracting them all to the center so that they form a thick cluster of buildings. That's what these transform nodes are for. We're going to be copy stamping a rotation value in there so that they will be rotated either 90, 180, or 270 degrees. So to do that, we're going to do the exact same as this. Let's copy the first function, paste it in, and instead of from 0 to 9, we're going to change this from 1 to 4. Because what we're going to be doing is we're going to be multiplying a 90-degree angle by either 1, 2, 3, or 4, so that the rotations of the buildings will either be 90 degrees, 180 degrees, 270 degrees, or 360 degrees. Basically 0. Now, we did the house variation from 0 to 9, but for the commercial buildings, we've only got 7 variations, 0 to 6. So this is what you want to have in the houses. This is what you want to have in commercial. And this is what you want to have in the rotation variable. Now let's stamp the rotation variable into our transform nodes. We're going to find the rotate along Y and say stamp, open, close, copy 1. We want the rotation variable, so again rotation, and we're going to say 1. So this will get a random rotation. So this random rotation literally only comes in as anything between 1 and 4. So what we now want to do is, after it, type times 90, and now we should see that these buildings, for example, let's look at this elongated one. It will be the same one as this, so these two, but they are rotated at different angles. And if we look at the normals that we've given them earlier, they should have rotated along. So this one has the x-axis facing this way in the negative x, whereas this one has the x-axis facing in the positive z. They all have different angles and rotations, so that's what we want, because when we're going to pull them together and simulate them into place later, that's going to add extra variety to our building clusters. Let's copy this and paste it into the other transform node as well, leave as is. And now if we change the switch back to commercial, we should get the same effect on the commercial buildings. Now we don't want to pack them yet because we want to do that later. If we pack the geometry before copying, what it's going to do is it will actually pack each and every one of them, but then all the attributes on top of them will be gone. They will be packed inside, whereas I want them to be at the top level of the objects. So we're not going to pack them here. Make sure that's turned off on your copy node, and let's drop down an assemble node. What the assemble node does is it's going to look at each copy stamped building, and here we can give it a name. Let's call it bounding box or bbox underscore. Now what this does is we have it creating a name attribute for us. So if we right click, we should have a name attribute on it, and that will be bounding box 0, 1, 2, etc. Because every box has 6 faces, that makes sense. Yeah, we should see bounding box 0 6 times, bounding box 1 6 times, and so on, all the way down. After we pack them, we should only be seeing 1, but for now this is correct. Now the reason I want to do it like this is because now we can drop down a pack node, and the pack node allows us to define which attributes we want to transfer on top. On the transfer attributes, you can type them in directly, or you can use the drop down menu, and I want to transfer everything. So the normal up, I want the name to remain consistent. I want it to have building height, building ID, and building type, because we need these later to define the buildings. Now let's right click and look at our spreadsheet again. And now we can see in our point attributes that we have a position, X, Y, and Z. We have a building height, a building ID, building type, and a normal, and then up, and they have vector values being correct. So now if we look at building ID, we can also check that our copy stamping has worked. We are now looking at the commercial buildings. There should be 7 varieties, and we have commercial building, right, starting with 1, number 1, 0, and this will be 1060, so that is commercial building starting with 1, variety number 7 being 60 as we start with 00. We should have the same effect if we look at the houses. Let's change this switch to 0. We should see everything change. Houdini cuts away all the zeros in front, but it shouldn't really matter. What we can see is we have different variety of buildings. If the sorting doesn't work properly, you can right click and say sort ascending or descending. That's fine for now. Let's leave it there. Now let's just drop down a transform node again. The only reason for this is that I just want to move the buildings up a little bit to make sure that they are not sat at 0 anymore. As we can see now, they should all be happily sitting at 0, but I want to move them up a little bit because we're going to simulate them into place. So I'm going to pull them into an RBD sim in a moment, a bullet simulation, and basically drop them down. So to avoid them intersecting with the floor, which will be sat at 0, and falling through, I'm just going to move them up, let them drop down and collide with the surface. That way we get them all properly sat in place. So let's just translate them up in Y by 0.5. That will be enough. And let's drop down a null node and call it out buildings. Let's capitalize out and color it green. And of course Y right up. And in the next video, we'll continue by setting up the DOP simulation.